And now we move into the third great teaching discourse of Jesus, which is the parables discourse, which consists primarily of Matthew chapter 13. So what we find in Matthew chapter 13 is a cluster of many of Jesus's most famous parables. And in the lectionary, what the church does is spends 3 Sundays in ordinary time taking us slowly through this discourse on the parables. So that should tell you that the parables of Jesus are important, and that if we're going to understand his message, we need to be able to understand the parables. So the gospel for this Sunday is a long gospel. It's the first 23 verses of Matthew's gospel. So what I'd like to do is kind of walk through it in order, but stop and pause at certain points and explain what's going on, rather than read the whole gospel and then come back to the beginning. So let's begin. The first section of the gospel just sets the stage for what Jesus is going to do throughout the rest of the chapter, and also gives us the first, and in some ways the most famous of his parables, which is the parable of the sower. So let's do those first few verses. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 1 and following, we read, "That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat there. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables." All right, pause there. The Greek word there for parable is parabole. So this is a loan word from Greek into English. It's a translation of the Hebrew word mashal, which literally means a riddle or a proverb. Okay, so the idea of Jesus teaching in parables here in a Jewish context isn't just comparison stories, although that's the primary meaning of the Greek word. The Greek word does mean parabole does mean to compare two things, to throw them together, literally. But it's based on a Hebrew word that also has the connotation of a proverb or a riddle. And so one of the first things I want to stress here about the parables is that many of Jesus' parables aren't just stories comparing two things, one to another. They also are riddles. Okay? So whenever you read the parables of Jesus, you want to ask yourself, is there something unusual going on in this comparison? Is there something unusual in this story? Or, as I like to tell my students, look for the twist. There's almost always a twist in Jesus' parables, something unexpected. And if you can figure out what the twist is, then you're going to get at the heart of the parable. You're going to find the meaning of the riddle. You're going to unlock the meaning of the riddle. So, he's teaching them many things in parables, and this first parable here is the parable of the sower. So it says this: "A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Now other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they had not much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Now other seeds fell upon thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Now other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear." Okay, let's pause there for just a moment. Now, if you're a cradle Catholic, or if you've been going to Mass for several years regularly, you're going to be familiar with this story, the story of the sower who goes out to sow seed, and the seed falls on different kinds of ground. However, I kind of want to just back up and try to imagine, what would a first century Jew have thought about this parable? Like, how would they have reacted to it? Because a lot of times what happens is we become so familiar with the story of the parable, we often miss the twist. We often miss the unexpected nature of what Jesus is describing here. So let me try to put you in their shoes and imagine it for just a second. So let's start back at the beginning of the parable. Jesus says, "A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path." All right, pause there. That's the first unexpected element to this parable, because any first century Jew would have known that if you're going to go and get seed, which was expensive, right, and you're going to plant it in your fields or in your garden, and that's your livelihood, you'd better take good care that none of the seed gets lost. And so what's being described here is a sower who is careless in his sowing of seed. I mean, think about it. Even if you plant a garden and you go out and buy some seeds at Lowe's or Home Depot or the garden center or whatever, and you bring them home, what are you going to do? You're going to put each seed in the furrows, right? You're going to put them in the soil in just the right spot so that they can grow. You're not going to, on the way home from the store, drop some seed in the driveway. What's going to happen to that seed if you do? It's going to be, it's not going to take any root, and it'll be either eaten by birds or it'll be crushed, right, in the pathway. So already there's a twist to this parable, namely this, that this sower doesn't know what he's doing. He's seemingly careless with the seed, right? He drops some on the path. So let's keep going. Other seeds fell on rocky ground. Okay, once again, the sower obviously has no idea what he's doing. This guy is a terrible farmer. He's not only dropping seed in the highway on the street, he's also dropping it in the rocky ground where nothing is going to grow. And sure enough, although there's a little bit of soil there, there's not enough for it to last. So it sprouts up quickly, but it withers away as well very quickly. And then finally, in the next image, it says that other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Yet again, this guy is the worst farmer in the universe. You don't plant seeds in the midst of thorns. They will do to the seeds exactly what weeds will do to your garden. So just to take a real quick personal example, I had planted a garden in my backyard this year. We went away for a long vacation, and I noticed some weeds were growing in the garden before we left, but I didn't have time to take care of them. By the time we got back, before we left, I planted squash plants. The squash was flourishing. It was green. They were giant plants. By the time we got back from vacation, the weeds had grown up and had completely, not just grown around the other plants, but choked them and killed them. Okay, so like 4 or 5 of the squash plants were completely dead because the weeds had gone in and choked them at the roots, right? Why did this happen? Because I'm a terrible gardener, right? And the same thing's true of the sower here. This guy does not know what he's doing, right? Or at least he apparently doesn't know what he's doing because he's so careless and gratuitous with all of these seeds, okay? So all these farmers are going to be, first century Jews are going to be puzzled. Like, who is this crazy sower? And what does this have to do with the kingdom of God? Then finally, he gets it right. Some of the seed falls on good soil. And on that good soil, it brings forth grain that you would make, wheat that you would make bread with. But notice how much it brings forth. 60-fold, 30-fold, and 100-fold. Okay? Now, pause there for a moment. As a number of scholars have argued here, in an ordinary harvest in the first century AD, 7.5-fold would be like an average harvest, and 10-fold would be a good harvest. So what is Jesus describing here? 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold? This is almost miraculous. Like, this is a super abundant harvest. And again, that's unexpected because this sower doesn't seem to know what he's doing. Yet when he gets it in the good soil, it's like a miraculous harvest, right? Super abundant grain, super abundant wheat, right? And how does Jesus end? He who has ears to hear, let him hear, let him listen. That alone should tell you right there that this is a puzzle. This is a riddle. He's calling you to try to grasp the deeper meaning of the parable. It's not going to be obvious. You got to have ears. Your ears have to be open to what he's trying to say. All right? Now, that's the end of the parable. Now, if you keep going in the gospel reading, you'll see that the disciples themselves are puzzled by this manner of teaching. And look at how they respond. We're going to leave the meaning of the parable for just a minute. Let's look at this interlude. The gospel keeps going. Then the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" Now pause there. If I asked you that question, why did Jesus teach in parables? What would you say? What's the answer to the question? I don't know about you, but most people that I've met, and I know my own learning over the years, most people assume that, or will say, that Jesus taught in parables so that simple, ordinary people could understand it. In other words, that he gave these common stories from ordinary life so that even the simplest person could understand it, and so that his teaching would be as clear as possible. You know, he's not a philosopher. He's not using all this highfalutin language or whatever. And that's partially true. The parables are drawn from everyday life. They're drawn from the fields and the farms and fishing. So they're drawn from ordinary life. But they are not simple stories that would be clear and obvious to everyone. If you actually look at Jesus' answers to the apostles, it almost seems like he's saying the precise opposite. So look at what he says there. Why do you speak to them in parables? Verse 11, he answered them, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. But to them it has not been given. For to him who has more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, you shall indeed hear, but never understand. You shall indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are heavy of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should perceive with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn from me to heal them. Okay, pause there for a second. What did Jesus just say? He said that the reason he speaks in parables is precisely in order to conceal the secrets of the kingdom from those who are hard of heart, blind of sight, and deaf of hearing, right? So the parables have a kind of paradoxical function. They both reveal the mysteries of the kingdom to the disciples and conceal the kingdom to those whose hearts are hardened against Jesus. So the parables are not, nice little stories that everybody can understand. They are mysteries. They are riddles that you need the grace of an open mind and an open heart and an open ear to be able to grasp. In other words, the parables would have been confusing to people and not just simple teachings anyone could understand. And that's why he says to the disciples, to you it has been given to understand the secrets of the kingdom. And the word there in Greek for secrets is mysteria. We get the word mystery from that. So yet again, just like last Sunday in ordinary time, where Jesus talked about the mystery of the Son and the mystery of the Father, so now he's talking about the mystery of the kingdom. This is a supernatural mystery you can't just figure out because you're really smart. It has to be revealed to you through the grace of God. Okay? So the parables conceal it from those who are hard of heart. And here he is quoting, this is a chapter from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 14 to 15. It was basically a prophecy of Isaiah, who was speaking in the 8th century to the Israelites at a time when they were very corrupt and they were very sinful. And guess what Isaiah would do? When he wanted to condemn them for their hard-heartedness and sinfulness, he would use parables. He would use allegories, like in Isaiah chapter 5 and chapter 6, because the parable was a way, I don't want to say it was a safe way, but it was a kind of safe way to condemn your audience without explicitly just condemning them. It made them think about their own state of hard-heartedness. And so Jesus takes the language of Isaiah and he says, I speak in parables because of what Isaiah said. Because just like Isaiah was speaking to a sinful people whose hearts were hardened, so now those who are rejecting me in our time are fulfilling that prophecy of Isaiah. Whereas the disciples have been given the grace to understand. And that's what he says in the next verses. Verse 16 and following. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous men longed to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. So the disciples have been given a special grace to hear and to understand. But, as you all know from the Gospels, that doesn't mean they always get it, and so they need a little help. And so what Jesus does now is he not only gives them the parable, the riddle, he also gives them the explanation. He breaks it down for them and tells them what the meaning of this riddle is.